Hi, I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show. Well, folks, it is the middle of summer. I hope everyone is having a wonderful time. Hopefully, you're spending lots of time outdoors and with family and friends, maybe out at a cottage or a cabin or wherever you might go and do it in the summer. But given that we're in the middle of summer, I mean, it is mid July. Usually, it's quite quiet this time of year. There is a lot going on news wise. We have these Alberta Next town halls happening across Alberta. We're going to cover those and talk about those. And then we have the premiers meeting in Muskoka, Ontario, and Prime Minister Mark Carney is out joining them today. So we've got some clips and some updates from that. Plus, we have a by-election coming up in Alberta. Well, we will see whether Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, can regain his position as a member of Parliament and become the official opposition again. And to talk about these topics and more, I'm pleased to be joined by one of my favorite guests here on the Candice Malcolm Show. I'm talking about Brett Wilson. Brett is an investment banker, entrepreneur, and a philanthropist. You probably know him from his days as the Dragon's Den star, and he also hosted Risky Business on Slice. So, Brett, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm proudest of being a grandpa, but keep going.
Okay, well, I'll add that into the bio for the next time around. I want to get your thoughts on these Alberta Next town halls. So, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has been hosting Alberta Next town halls. They've done 2 so far, and there will be 8 done in the future. So, we saw her last week, first in Red Deer on Tuesday, and then Sherwood Park. And they're certainly generating a lot of media, a lot of discussions about the tour itself and the purpose of it, whether it's fulfilling a necessary role. We know that former Alberta Premier Jason Kenney held similar town halls. And so there are 6 key questions that are being posed to Albertans during these town halls, getting feedback from the public, basically discussing things related to Alberta's autonomy. So the 6 questions that are being posed are: 1, should Alberta push for equalization reform? 2, should Alberta withdraw from the Canada Pension Plan and create its own pension system? 3, should Alberta replace the RCMP and have its own provincial police service? 4, should Alberta lead efforts with other provinces to amend the Constitution, strengthen provincial rights? 5, should Alberta take greater control over immigration to counter Ottawa's open border approach? And finally, 6, should Alberta collect personal income taxes directly rather than through the CRA and have its own system of taxation? So all of these are really interesting questions, certainly interesting in wake of the Liberal government getting reelected again, right? Like it's hard to overstate this fact, but typically in a democracy, you have a sway from left to right, and it's a course correction, right? And so after 10 years of Liberal governments, and we had one of the most left-wing Liberal government in Canadian history, with you just known for its excesses in every area of life. It's like it's time for a shift back. And in a normal democratic system, you would have eventually a shift back to the right, except for in Canada, we didn't get that. We got another Liberal government under Mark Carney. So, of course, there's a lot of frustration bubbling up on the surface, especially in a conservative province like Alberta. So, before we get into any of the details of the first 2 town halls and how they went for Premier Smith, I'm wondering, like, what are your thoughts on the state in Alberta and whether you think these town halls are a productive approach to sort of talk about a lot of the issues that are bubbling up?
I think one of the most important things that Danielle's trying to do is raise the profile of the conversation as opposed to limit it to the social media, limit it to legacy media and the noise that, to be blunt, it's just not as professional or thoughtful as it could be. The coverage is so biased and it's very frustrating. But let's go back to the big picture. How many questions of those 6 could be rephrased as, can we live the way Quebec lives in terms of CPP, in terms of RCMP, in terms of collecting tax, in terms of the equalization structure? I mean, so much of what we're asking is, can we not operate and function just like Quebec? And so for people to come out, especially in the media, legacy media, criticizing the fact that we're questioning whether or not the RCMP should be on our budget or the Alberta Police should be part of our own budget, or should we be paying the RCMP as part of a federal initiative? There's virtually nothing on this list that doesn't tie to the question, if Quebec has these rights, why can't we? And it's that simple. I just don't understand the debate. Now, I've got several friends on the Alberta Next committee. They were delighted to be asked. They were provoked to be thoughtful and engaging. And please make sure if you're in for every event. And a couple of my friends, I spoke with them last night, were literally accosted as they were leaving the Red Deer site in an almost bullying way
Hmm.
by people saying, "You've got to support separation or you don't serve any purpose here." And some fairly, again, animated, not physically violent, but certainly attempting to be emotionally abusive conversations. And it just didn't make sense. The disappointment from a couple of my friends, again, who attended these was that the participation of younger people is very low. We kind of laughed and said it was 50 to 70 or you're not getting in. And whether that's absolutely true or not, the bias was to a much older age group. And again, my hope, if anyone that thinks that Danielle Smith is a separatist is delusional, misguided, misinformed, or stupid, any of those work. She's not.
Right. Right. Like, one of the criticisms, certainly from legacy media and people on social media, is that Premier Smith is stoking the separatist, sentiment, and that she's using these as a preference to push the separatist idea. I actually see it as the complete opposite, right? She's like, there are legitimate concerns that are out there. And to your point, like, there's already precedent in this country. We are a decentralized federation. There's precedent for a provincial government to have more control over their own resources and over their own destiny, and so if one province can do it, why couldn't another? I mean, it's almost absurd that that would even be a controversial question. And so I do want to get to some of them. And oh, and just one other thing, Brett, I will say that for young people, it's the middle of summer. I don't blame them, right? We get like 2-3 months of nice weather a year in this country. And if you're young, you're gonna be out with your friends. You're gonna be out enjoying life, maybe with your kids at home, and not going to a political town hall. So I don't begrudge the young for not going. Although I will say, each of these, it seems that there's been 400 to 500 people attend in person, but then another, couple 100,000 online. So people are still engaging with these town halls. Online rather than perhaps in person. So we'll start with the Red Deer event, which happened last Tuesday, July 15th. Some 450 people showed up, according to Global News, to put questions to Premier Smith and the 15 other members on the panel. This is sort of what you expect. People go because they're animated, because they're worked up, rather that they really believe in Alberta separation, or perhaps that they really oppose it, or that they really oppose what Premier Smith is doing, and they're going to heckle her personally, or just to show their frustration with the system. I'm here for it. I think these town halls are a great exercise in democracy. But I'll show you one clip from attendee that I think captured a lot of the sentiment that people were feeling around these panels. So a woman is said, "Look, sorry, I don't know if it's actually a woman or a man, but an attendee argues that Alberta separation is basically the only choice here, and that if you're not talking about separation, like, what are we even doing here?" So let's play that clip.
Your video said it's all. Ottawa continues or has ignored us and will continue to ignore us. It doesn't matter what we do here tonight or what the outcome of this is. They will continue to ignore us. There's one question only, that needs to be on a referendum, and that is, do you support Alberta exiting Canadian Confederation and becoming a sovereign nation? At that point, then you'll be able to negotiate with Ottawa. Then you'll be able to negotiate with Quebec. Without that, they will continue to ignore us.
So that's an interesting point, because you could tell the crowd was mostly in agreement with that gentleman there. He's not even necessarily saying that we need to separate, but he's saying that we need to have a clear question of separation that we can take to the feds, that we can take to Quebec, and have a better bargaining chip. So I think that's an interesting perspective. What did you make of that one?
Well, so I appreciate that. And in fact, that's the one part of the conversation that is important. It's just, I kind of make fun. I've been on stage a few times in the last several months talking about separation. And I asked the question, do you want a wall like Trump put up between Mexico and the US? Or do you want just a chain link fence? Or should we just build a moat between Alberta and Saskatchewan? And people look at me like that's some of the stupidest thought process imaginable. And I go, acknowledge. Absolutely. Because the reality is that separation involves one thing, that's paperwork. We got to get better paperwork. It's all the elements of the deals we've done with the feds. And if we can use the separation noise, the leverage of the people saying enough is enough is enough, and we need to change relative to call it sovereignty. I happen to be a little biased. I've been asked to put money up and play a more active role in separation. My polite response is I believe in collaboration. let's work as the West. And again, there's a group of provinces in Eastern Canada, imaginatively called Atlantic Canada. Well, let's collaborate and become Western Canada in a working way. Wab Kinew has expressed an interest in the idea of a northern corridor coming from Churchill and maybe ultimately across into Alberta, and then Alberta goes all the way out to Prince Rupert. I mean, there's so many great options embedded in doing things better, but it's paperwork. And what's really interesting is Bill C5, approved by the Conservatives and the Liberals, is promoting the acceleration of projects. And the acceleration of projects creates jobs. It creates royalties. It creates income. It creates wealth. And if we're doing that collaboratively in the West, we win automatically. So let's keep those thoughts alive. Anyone thinking that Alberta on a standalone basis is better off is misguided. I believe we need better rapport with the feds. I'm with you totally. I'm with that person totally in the context of, can we do better with federal Canada? Well, yes, but right from 1907, we've had that problem.
Right. Well, I want to add in another element of this, which seems to be that the media in Alberta are out to get Premier Smith, and they want to paint this as a train wreck and as a disaster. So I'll point you to the Edmonton Journal, who was covering the second event, which happened just outside of Edmonton. And so the headline that they put up was, "Smith hears mixed reviews from Edmonton crowd on Alberta Next pitches. Smith's opening remarks were interrupted by heckles and laughter on Wednesday, in contrast to the friendlier response she and the panel received the night earlier in Red Deer." And so you would kind of think like, "Oh, okay, maybe she got, like, booed off the stage," or, "Oh, that sounds, like, pretty confrontational," the way that the Edmonton Journal described it, that she was interrupted by heckles and laughs. So we went and we watched her opening remarks to try to find the heckling and the laughter, but we had to watch it a few times because you could be forgiven for missing it. It was very minor. It was a very small group of people, you could tell. So I'm gonna play the clip of what happened, and then, the audience can decide for themselves whether Smith was really heckled and laughed, during her opening, statement. Let's play that clip.
Alberta has an Ottawa problem. For the last 10 years, Ottawa, led, it must be said, by successive Liberal governments, has taken direct aim at Alberta's core industries. It's the truth, if Alberta is to be a strong and unified country, it has to include a strong and sovereign Alberta within a united Canada, able to pursue our own potential.
So, yeah, there was 1 or 2 guys heckling, and then it sounded more like there were counter hecklers, like people telling the 1 or 2 hecklers to be quiet, and you could tell by the time Smith finished her sentence that she had won over the room again. They were all cheering for her. So it wasn't exactly contentious the way that the Edmonton Journal was making it seem. A handful of people, if you were to say the statement that Ottawa has been getting in the way of Alberta's resources, like 95% of people in Alberta would probably agree. And it just so happened that the 5% that disagree happened to be in the audience, and they heckled, and then they got counter heckled. And that's kind of the nature of these town halls, right? That's the point. It's like democracy in action, and it's great. And Danielle Smith handled herself incredibly well, but that's not the way that the headline writes it. What do you make of it, Brett?
Well, I certainly intend to attend. So that's one. I want to see the noise and get a sense, because I think there's an immediate bias that there's a lot of, call it the noisemakers, are attempting to attract other noisemakers to this sort of situation. And again, I talked to a couple of the members of the next panel. They were delighted with the engagement at a very professional level. One of them shared the experience leaving, being bullied effectively by a couple of guys who were pro separation only, didn't understand the difference between sovereignty and separation. And again, I get back to, do we need independence within the country of Canada? Well, yeah, there's an example. It's called Quebec. I mean, I just don't get why we can't parallel what Quebec has done, other than the fact that we're one of the greatest resource based nations. And when I talk about nations, I'm talking about Western Canada. Manitoba, Alberta, Saskatchewan, BC, Yukon, and Northwest Territories. What we have collaboratively, every product we have as a nation, maybe no lithium, I don't know, but there's got to be a little bit of everything, and especially the uranium, especially all the copper and coal and gold and oil and gas and trees and cows and farming. I mean, we've got everything. And if we can work collaboratively, become a little more sovereign, absolutely. But sovereign doesn't mean that we leave Canada. And I can tell you that the bias I hear amongst my own followers is, again, 98%. Let's improve where we are in Canada, but let's not pretend we're leaving Canada.
Yeah, well, it's funny that you make the comment about how there was a couple of loud people, aggressively sort of pro-American type. It's funny because I hosted an event in Calgary a few years ago, True North Nation. You were there, Brett, and there
Mhm.
were a couple guys with 51st state hats. And this was way before Trump even said the thing. And it was kind of the same thing. They were like aggressively interrupting and following me around at some point with a camera, basically just trying to get me on record whether I would support the idea. And it's like, that's not what we're even talking about. But I feel like the people who are really gung ho about that idea aren't exactly the polite types that go to a conference to, sit quietly and listen. They're usually there to cause a bit of a spectacle.
You know what I really wish is that we could have one session for each of Carney, Polev, Moe, Smith, and Ford to start with Joe Rogan.
Mm.
Let's get them down and
Yeah.
let Joe pull them apart. Let Joe and his followers. I genuinely believe that if Pierre had been able to swing time with a couple of call it the podcast kings of the United States, and there's 4 or 5, not just one, but Joe Rogan being the most obvious, I think he could have picked up in the voting panels the 2 or 3% needed to have swung dozens of ridings. Dozens of ridings could have swung their way.
I that's an interesting because I've been talking about this with some people kind of behind the scenes on the Polyev campaign. They basically just said, look, Polyev was painted as being too pro-American and too right-wing, right? And so if he showed up on one of those podcasts that the media deem as American right-wing, they would just have a field day. Like the thing that Pierre was trying to win over was the like suburban boomers, and those were the people that would pearl clutch the hardest over seeing. And but I agree. I would love to hear the thoughts. I would like to have a debate. Imagine a debate on Joe Rogan between Mark Carney and Pierre Polyev. That would be amazing, way better than anything that the Debates Commission, could have presented, and I hope that, in the future, we have those kind of long form conversations, and speaking of a couple of the names that you mentioned that you'd like to see, a bunch of them were here in Muskoka, Ontario, just a bit north of where I am, having discussions. The premiers all met in Muskoka, Ontario, on Monday, and Prime Minister Mark Carney is there today, mostly just discussing trade, the latest from President Trump and the looming deadline on tariffs that are coming. So I think we have a quick clip of Prime Minister Carney saying that, uh, you know, we're going to do what we can, but the best thing we can do for Canada is just to improve our own economy. Let's play that clip.
We are looking for the best deal for Canada. We are only going to accept the best deal for Canada. That is very much informed by our discussions. We understand as well that we all understand that the global trade environment is changing. And there are some countries that are pulling back, that are restricting market access. What we collectively can most control is building a stronger economy.
So, what do you make of how Prime Minister Carney is handling all this, Brett?
Well, to start with, the fact that the feds and the provincial leaders are meeting regularly. I mean, 2 weeks ago in Prince Edward Island, every energy minister met with Hodgson and team. So they're meeting and meeting regularly. Why? Because talk is talk, action is action. But you got to start with talk. You can't just start building projects. You've got to get the engagement to happen. And let's not forget for a moment that the Liberal Party hasn't used the word Trudeau for any purpose whatsoever in 3 or 4 months. It's pretty clear that they're abandoning what Trudeau attempted to do in terms of abusing our nation for his misguided beliefs in climate and destroying the Canadian economy will improve the planet for everyone. That was Trudeau's approach. Obviously, the Liberals are very, very conscious. Bill C5 tells the whole story from my perspective. There's some that argue that it's got too much power. Some of my First Nations friends are upset with their First Nation friends for abusing the fact that C5 is going to accelerate all of this. C5 doesn't override anything Indigenous. It overrides some of the noise of Bill C-48, C-69, things that the federal government imposed without logic or reason. All we're doing is trying to accelerate. And so the First Nations are rightfully saying, look, we got to be part of this. You can't ignore us. Well, that was never the intent. And that's the beauty, I think, of C5 if we can get that moving. So just going back to the big picture you asked, I mean, they're meeting in Huntsville. The leaders are meeting regularly, and that's obvious because pardon me, a guy named Donald Trump is forcing them to meet.
Well, it's really interesting. There's a couple different dynamics, right? Like one of them was the premiers were all asked about an east-west pipeline, right? And it seemed like a few years ago this was like a lost battle. It was off the table. And now here we are revisiting it, and it seems like, nobody wants oil that goes through the United States when you're in a trade war with America. So it seems like there is more of an appetite to build an east-west pipeline. I want to zoom in a little bit on just the Trump tariffs though, because I want to point this to people's attention, a CBC article that, to their credit, goes in depth. It says many Canadian exports can avoid Trump tariffs if they're, and then I don't know why, but the CBC calls it CUS. I think the Americans call it USMCA, the next iteration of NAFTA, if they're compliant. And so, what does that mean? Well, basically, this story says that companies can be exempt from the tariff as long as they are compliant with the trade deal that they've already signed, and that some 86% of the value of Canada's exports to the US have the potential to qualify for one of these exemptions, just as long as they adhere to the trade agreement that we've already ratified and signed. And so all of this makes me just think like this is all just much ado about nothing. Like this is a bunch of people getting really concerned, the media drumming this up like tariffs, more tariffs are coming, it's going to destroy the Canadian economy. And then it turns out, well, we already have a trade deal. And as long as they're compliant with the trade deal that exists, they actually won't be subject to these new tariffs. So, again, this almost feels a little bit like a manufactured crisis here. What do you think, Brett?
It sounds like Canadian media taking control of the nonsense. I'm not as convinced that Trump has a real vision and plan for what Trump's tariffs will look like. He wants a better deal. And that's where, again, there's lots of reasons to disrespect Trump. But when you think about the big picture, protect the border, get rid of bad guys, try and stop the wars on a global basis. I mean, the previous US government did nothing that was apparent in terms of attempting to make the world a better place. Trump's trying to do it in the style of his own, again, rhetoric, which is, he'll promise one thing on Monday and by Tuesday he's forgotten, but he's asking for better deals. And the idea of letters, trade agreements, tariffs, all that stuff, his team is working hard. I was really impressed, by the way, slight distraction, with those 4 senators that came to Canada to say, look, let's not forget, we're friends.
Well, exactly. And I think that, we have a lot more in common, than the things that divide us. And I mean, there's a reason why we have these trade agreements, right? It's like we all have industries that that we want to focus on, that we want to protect. I mean, Canada's certainly very guilty of doing that with our dairy industry. And it makes sense that the Americans will say, look, the whole purpose of trade is based on reciprocity. So if you want to subsidize one of your industries, you're going to have to get hit with tariffs, and that's just the way the trading world goes. It's nothing that Trump invented himself. And I think that we would all be better off if we remembered that our economies are very intertwined, our cultures are very intertwined, our communities are intertwined. Many of our families are intertwined across both sides. So, I don't like the drumming of the anti-American sentiment that has been being pushed in Canada last year. I really, really don't like it at all.
Now, and to jump on your point, I don't want to be the 51st state, but paperwork is paperwork. And if we can get a better deal done with the Americans, for example, just Western Canada trading north-south than east-west, well, that's a Canadian problem. But it's a win for call it Western Canada, or I keep calling it the collaboration. But so much we can do. By the way, in the background, I'm starting to move into the coal industry. All hands on deck, so to speak. I'll be writing checks. I'm going on boards, and I'll play a more active role in raising the profile of steel making for export only underground coal. I mean, there's absolutely no objection, potential, possible, legitimate, for saying no to steelmaking coal being shipped to the world. One of the greatest ways of making money for Canada. And it's going to be interesting because we've got environmental groups opposed to any coal. Any coal. Well, where does that come from? Anyway, just share some of the noise that's in the background that we all have to deal with.
Well, it's one of the frustrating things in Canada generally is that there is a large environmentalist group. And look, I love the environment. I love the natural environment. I take time with my kids and spend time in nature every day. But there is a contingent of the population. It's very small and very fringe, but they're very active. And any project, any pipeline, any natural resource development, they will get in front of it. They have knowledge of things that are happening, and it's like they have an outsized impact, partially because the media allows them to, partially because our legal system and police sort of treat them with kid gloves. But I think Canada, I mean that's a whole other.
It's an ongoing challenge.
Yeah, and okay, I want to final topic that I want to cover with you today is the longest ballot initiative, because this again is just out of control, right? Like during the federal election in Pierre Poilievre's home riding of Carleton, there were some 120 or 160 people on the ballot. It was ridiculous and embarrassing for Canada, and you would think that Elections Canada would do something about it. No, they have not. And now in the upcoming by-election that Pierre Poilievre is running in, there's 132 people on the ballot. 132 people on the ballot. So the longest ballot initiative record of 91 candidates was broken when it reached 100. It's now, 138. I mean, this is absolutely absurd. We have Pierre Poilievre speaking at a town hall in Stettler, Alberta, just saying that this is a total scam. Let's play that clip.
You can fix this. We could simply, for example, say that everybody who gets on the ballot should have to have 1,000 unique signatures from residents in the community, and that no one can sign such a petition twice. That would make it impossible for 200 people to go out and have their names piled onto the list. There are a number of other things that you could do that would make it so that only real candidates who are truly running to put their name forward in our democracy are on that list. But either way, we have to take action, because this is a scam. It is unfair, it is unjust, and it must stop.
Like, I get that the point that people are trying to push is that they believe in proportional representation, so they want to draw attention to the fact that the candidate's vote doesn't necessarily relate to how many seats are in Ottawa or whatever. But why are they allowed to do this, right? Like, they can make that point through, I don't know, like an advocacy campaign and writing op-eds in the Globe and Mail or something. Like, why do they have to do it by flooding Pierre Poilievre everywhere he goes with all of these candidates? It just makes it confusing. And again, it makes Canada look like an absolute joke. What do you make of this, Brett?
Well, there's certainly nothing to be said that these people are claiming advocacy for the benefit of Canada. They're just disturbing, or whatever the right term is offline. But, I'm aware that something like 50 or 60 of the names that were in Ottawa are now in Alberta. Well, how did that qualify? How did that happen? I mean, obviously, didn't they say, oh, well, Pierre moved or Poilievre moved, so it's okay? Well, let's be crystal clear. And Poilievre has said, and I agree with him for the most part. I actually like the idea of requiring a $5,000 deposit. And if you don't get 1% of the votes, you're out. Too bad, so sad. But Poilievre's approach, which was, let's get 1,000 signatures, legitimate, local, dedicated, single purpose only support for a nomination. That's fine. You can vote for whoever you want, but let's get the nominations properly organized. And the fact that Canada hasn't got that organized, it's an embarrassment in terms of stupidity. And now Elections Canada can just bow their head and say, well, too bad. I mean, the solutions are so simple. A deposit or minimum names, number of names for the nomination. It's so simple.
Exactly. Like, it's not like they need to pass sweeping legislation to fix this. It's like a procedural thing. Just make them put a deposit down, or make them have proof of address in the riding. How about, like, even something very simple like that? It's like
Well,
they were just humiliated, and then they did nothing, and now it's happening again.
I know, it's madness. And I actually talked to a lawyer a while ago and said, is there anyone I could sue over this? And again, just the goal was to pot disturb in terms of what's going on, but it served no benefit. So there's no one particular group. There's a group of people seem to be collaborating, but they don't belong as a group. They aren't the Undermine Canada group.
Well, and it's also it just seems a little misguided, right? Because it's like Pierre Poilievre is the leader of the opposition, right? So if this is a group that's trying to get the attention of, I don't know, the Liberal government, like, why wouldn't they go after Liberals? Why wouldn't they go after Mark Carney or previously Justin Trudeau? No, it's because these all of these advocates, it's always they have like a secondary motive, which is just that they hate conservatives and they have like an anti-conservative bias. So they're trying to humiliate him, and then they're also supposedly making this other point about direct democracy. Last word to you, Brett.
Well, I get a lot of noise on social media. I've learned a long time ago to stop reading it. I get the odd piece I like and I'll compliment it. So reinforce the positive, ignore the negative. But that's hard for people to do on social media. And I even deleted a couple of tweets that I put out on Nahid Nenshi a couple of weeks ago when I had a private moment with him at a social event and realized I was pushing him a little too hard. So I backed off a little bit. But the noise and the way we use social media, and again, go back to legacy media, the two just don't really give us democracy. And these open houses, which is where we started this conversation, aren't really it's a great element of the process. So Danielle can look back and say, I visited 8 cities, 8 regions, 8 areas, and I did so with 10 or 15 qualified business leaders, people who have legitimate investments in Alberta. They're not just one vote. Yes, we're all just one vote, but they influence other outcomes because of their role in the business world. And I like what she's trying to do. And again, I appreciate that 450 people coming out to rant, and who knows what the next 6 will be. The legacy media is trying to fill the rooms with rhetoric and noise.
Right. Well, just final thought is that I remember talking to Preston Manning during COVID, and we were talking about the 2021 election and how hard it was for those politicians because everything was done via Zoom. They weren't allowed to do big rallies and conferences and stuff like that. And one of the things that you get from being in a physical room full of people is you get immediate feedback, right? Like when you're online and you're tweeting, you get like your echo chamber. So you get like your trolls that hate you, and then your legion of fans that love you, and you don't really get the middle, right? But if you're forced to go out and go to these kind of events in like Danielle Smith is doing, right? Like she goes to a friendly place like Red Deer, but then she'll also go to Edmonton where she may not have gotten very many votes or where there may be more people that oppose her. And she tests different ideas. She says different things. She sees, which one gets a positive response, which doesn't, and she owns her message and it impacts her. It has an impact. And that is what you want of your leaders. You want them to be out there meeting Canadians, hearing different perspectives and different voices so that they can go back and decide the best course. And so, I didn't have a lot of good things to say about Justin Trudeau, but I did like the fact that he would go out and do these town halls because it shows that he has confidence in his ideas to go and debate them. Although it didn't always go very well for Justin Trudeau when he was doing that, but for Danielle Smith, certainly, she has the ability to stand on her feet. Someone heckles her, she takes it in stride. She goes, and by the time she finishes her sentence, the room is behind her and cheering her. And so I think it shows a very confident politician that is able to take all that feedback in real life, but also stand on their ideas and work through even though there may be what the media push as heckling and laughing and jeering, which was pretty mild, but still, I think these are great exercise. I want more politicians to do them.
Well, the fact that we've got the federal leadership and the provincial premiers meeting on a much more frequent basis than ever occurred under Trudeau, and I hate even using his word or his name, but the fact that we're trying to move forward and get things done, actions. I mean, the objections are again, First Nations, for example. It's okay for them to object. It's not okay for them not to come to the table and have true, thoughtful, ongoing conversations. And so there's so much still to be done. And whether you voted Liberal, Conservative, or the odd NDP, or basically the parties have said, let's get rolling. And that's what excites me for Canada. Would I rather that Poilievre was in the driver's seat? Yeah. Would I wish that he had gone to visit Joe Rogan? Yeah. I mean, there's lots of things that we wish we could have done differently. But moving forward, I'm excited that we're actually in conversation. Again, Bill C-5 was one of the most pivotal bills that I've ever seen in all of my life watching activity proposed. Without C-5, it would be pointless. It would be a waste of time.
Yeah, I mean, it would have taken a long time to undo all of the disastrous bills that Trudeau is pushing, and let's just make it be known that Mark Carney was behind the scenes pushing those kinds of bills as well. So it is good to see.
Oh,
Uh, right.
behind.
Yeah, you're not supposed to say that.
No, it's annoying that Carney could move from such an extreme. But again, they've blocked Trudeau. We talked about this before. They put him in a cupboard. They've deadbolted the door. They're not killing him, but they're taking him out of the picture completely. And I'm hopeful. I mean, I really do believe that we can get some things done. It's going to take forever to unwind any of those. I mean, let's go back to the big picture as well. EV mandates, telling us all we have to buy 20, 35 cars. I've pitched Hodgson and others saying, instead of an EV mandate, why don't you celebrate what hybrids can do? and make it interesting, make it exciting. But stop telling us what we have to do. Encourage us in terms of what we could, should, and might want to do. And that's just one example. The CER regulations, I think Guilbeault is going to be out of the go. We haven't heard the word Guilbeault in a month. He gets no profile now. He's been blocked by a party called the Liberal Party. So I think he's going to lose his role in cabinet in the next 3 to 6 months because he's irrelevant. And the only way they can really get rid of the noise that he created under Trudeau is to get rid of Guilbeault as well. And that's my bet right now. I'm putting 3-1 odds on him being gone by Christmas.
Wow. Well, I don't want to bet you against you because I hope you're right, and I hope that is the direction that the Carney government takes us in. Well, Brett, that's an optimistic note to end the podcast. And so, thanks so much for joining us. That is Brett Wilson, investor and entrepreneur. That's all the time we have for today, folks. We'll be back again tomorrow with all the news. I'm Candice Malcolm's Candice Malcolm Show. Thank you, and God bless.